Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
It's my pleasure to be on.
Now, last time we talked about how the Quran was memorized, and now we want to talk about how the Quran was written down and compiled, because at a certain point, there was a decision made to write the Quran. So tell me about that, Dr. Shabir.
Yeah, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, himself wasn't schooled in reading or writing according to Muslim tradition. The Quran seems to make reference to this in the 29th chapter when the Quran says, وَلَا تَخُطْهُ بِيَمِينِكَ, you do not write it with your right hand. إِذَا لَارْتَابَ الْمُبْتِلُونَ. Otherwise, those who want to raise a fuss would cause doubt about this. So the fact that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was not schooled in writing himself and he had to have other people write it for him is a further assurance to Muslims that he wasn't making it up and he was just getting it as a revelation from God. Because if he were making it up himself, how does it come out with all of the beauty and elegance of a written text that the Quran turns out to have? So he called on his companions to write it down. They were writing it down, and according to Muslim tradition, on a wide variety of simple materials, like even the barks of trees are mentioned, or flat stone, and so on. And it would be sometime after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that all of these diverse written pieces were collected and rewritten into the text of the Quran as we have it now.
So, Dr. Shabir, who exactly was writing down at this point? Because you said that many people were not lettered, right? Were not able to read and write.
So there were only a few, and they are mentioned in Islamic tradition. And along the lines of thinking that there were only a few people, we learned that after a certain battle, when the spoils were taken account of, naturally the Muslims lost some lives in that battle, the non-Muslims as well. And, the Muslims happened to have captured some of the non-Muslims who had come to fight against them. So now the question was what to do about these new captives, because they didn't have a list of, checks to say, okay, this is what we do with the prisoners of war. This was a new experience for them. So what are we going to do now? It was then thought that if someone could teach the Muslim children to read and write, then that person would be set free after this community service. So that was taken on, and it was found that only a few people could, satisfy that requirement. So people generally were not so literate at that time.
So, but there were some companions that are well known for having done that. For example, Zayd, right? Zayd bin Thabit.
Yes, Zayd bin Thabit was one of those who was a clever young man, and he was even able to learn other languages as well, so that he could help the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, with some foreign correspondence. So he was commissioned after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, commissioned by Abu Bakr, according to Muslim tradition, to make the first, you might say, semi-official compilation of the Quran. So he went around to everyone who had some written pieces of the Quran, and then he transcribed those written pieces onto sheets so that they were collected into a stack of sheets, which were then left in the care of Abu Bakr, the first caliph, after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had passed away.
So I understand he did that, I believe, very soon after the Prophet Muhammad died, right?
Within 2 years, because Abu Bakr's caliphate lasted only for 2 years. So this is how we know it's placed within those 2 years.
And I believe there were some battles at the time, so there was a fear that all the people who had memorized the Quran might have passed away, and that the Quran would be lost.
In fact, this is, according to the story, this is what prompted Abu Bakr to have Zayd bin Thabit make this collection. At first, there was even some resistance to the idea. Like, the thought was, since the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, hadn't done this, would we be overstepping our reasonable limits by doing something that he didn't do? But they saw this as a necessity because, the people who were at the forefront of trying to defend the frontiers of Islam were the people who were also very much enthused about the text of the Quran and the revelation that came to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. These were the people who are willing to give their lives for the message. And they were willing to give their lives not only in the battlefield, but also, in their spare time, in that they devoted themselves to memorizing the text. The text was dear to them. So when it so happened that the people who memorized the Quran were the same ones who went out to defend the Muslim frontiers, and then they were killed in battle, the leaders saw that we cannot continue like this, because if it so happens that the memorizers of the Quran are getting killed in battle, especially in one particular battle, a large number of them were said to have been killed. So that was alarming, and they thought that we need to preserve it in writing as well, so that we can be assured that with this double method, people memorizing and also having it in writing, the Quran would not be lost to subsequent generations.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Shabir, how assured are we that, through this process that you mentioned, the memorization first and then the writing and then the compilation, how much assurance do we have that what the Quran that we have today is the same one that was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad?
Well, a large number of manuscripts have been discovered recently, and many of them have been published by an institute in Turkey that goes by the acronym IRCICA, IRCICA. They have published, and they are selling these manuscripts, and they have published them in handsome volumes as keepsakes, proudly to demonstrate to Muslims that the Quran, as we have it in all of these ancient texts, is basically the same book. You might find some variations in spelling. Somebody spells a word with a long A, someone spells it with a short A, but it's still recitable with a long A. And they say that, and they show that you may have some spelling variations. You might even have a mistake in the text, which sometimes someone tries to correct either in the margin or by writing something above or below, because they're all handwritten, as opposed to like a printed text in which you can churn out a million copies all looking exactly the same. But with handwritten texts, people get tired, they miss a line, they write the line twice, and they, and so on. So basically, we have the same text. The variations in these texts are not so great as to affect anything that Muslims believe in, or to affect Muslim practice in any significant way. The most significant variations we find is in a text that is referred to as the Sana'a Palimpsest. Palimpsest, among manuscript specialists, refers to a document that has been erased, and then the writing material was used to write something else. Sometimes the same text, but sometimes a different text. It so happens that the erased writing on that palimpsest was Quranic text. We say Quranic with some kind of clarification that's needed, and we'll get to that. But what is written over it is also a Quranic text. Now, what is written over it corresponds more closely to what we are reading today in our Qurans. Again, with the same conclusion that the variations are not so great as to affect Muslim belief or Muslim practice in any significant way. The lower text, which had been erased and is now it's now visible with ultraviolet light and modern techniques at recovering a scraped off text. That is shown to also be Quranic, as I said, and it is not clear was that meant to be an actual accurate text of the Quran or not, because there are more variations in that text. But there too, the variations are not so great as to affect anything that Muslims believe or to affect Muslim practice in any significant way. And the variations which are noted there are the types of variations which we already know from Muslim history as attributed to great reciters of the Quran like Ibn Masud, Ubay bin Ka'b, close companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And Muslims have a way of putting this all together by saying that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, may have authorized some of his companions to read the same text basically in a variety of ways, perhaps to make it easier for people to memorize so that they were not given a stricture that it must be like precisely these letters and these words, so long as initially at least, so long as the meaning was maintained and the guidance was available through the recitation.
We'll leave it at that. Thank you for your time, Dr.
You're
Shabir.
welcome.
If you enjoyed this video, click like and subscribe. And please donate to support our work at QuranSpeaks.com.